Hi guys, welcome to today's tutorial. In today's video, we're going to be making this beautiful piece you see here on the screen, and we are going to be needing this great cup which comes with 4 slots or 4 cavities. The next thing we'll be needing are the resin and the hardener part A and part B. We'll be needing some mica pigments, some gloves. We'll be needing these mixing sticks. We'll also be using this mold for today's project, and lastly we are going to be using some leaf sheets. So we're going to start off by putting on the gloves that we'll be using for today's project. Today's project will be done using nitrile gloves. So nitrile gloves are much tougher as compared to the polythene gloves or the rubber gloves. They are much tougher. It's difficult to tear them as compared to the rubber gloves. And this one, you can use it for so many projects without having a puncture as compared to the polythene gloves, which doesn't have that much strength and you'd have to frequently change them because you'd end up having resin on your fingertips. Great. So I always advise you use nitrile gloves anytime you're working on a resin project because it's much durable. So we're going to start off by mixing the resin that we are going to be using. I'll be using these 4 cups since we are working with 4 different colors, and then the bigger cup will be used for the mixing. So since we are not using the mold now, we're going to set that aside so that we'll get enough space for the mixing of the resin. Before you work on any project, you always have to bear in mind that cleaning the cup or the items you are going to use is a very important step. So here I'm going to use my wet wipes to just give it a neat clean. That way any little particles or any filth that may be in the cup can be gotten rid of. So since this is a 3:1 ratio, we're going to be pouring 150 ml of resin and 50 ml of hardener. And we're going to start by pouring in the resin first. Pouring your chemicals shouldn't always be in a specific fashion, meaning you don't always have to start with the A and then proceed with the B. Once you are able to jot down the measurements or the quantities you need to pour for each of them, you can just pour them in any fashion, meaning you can start with the hardener and then end with the resin, or you can just start with the resin and end with the hardener. Starting with the hardener is not going to affect anything about the project. So once the resin was poured, I poured in the hardener as well, and then the next step was to mix the chemicals together. So here I'm using this wooden spatula or wooden stirrer, this mixing stick. I've used it countless times. If you are finding it difficult buying a silicone spatula, you can work with the mixing sticks. You just have to always wipe them regularly. Anytime you are done with a project, you just wipe them so that you don't end up leaving the resin to cure on the stick. That way you can use it for much longer. So once the resin was well mixed with the hardener, it was now time for us to work on the main project. So here you can see that it's much clearer as compared to before we actually did mix all the resin. Most of it was done off camera since mixing is going to take most of the time in the work. So here we're going to be working with a 4-grade cup. For meaning we are working with 4 different colors, so we are going to mix 4 different portions of the resin. Here I'm going to pour them into the cups. So pouring into the cups doesn't really have any rule or any measurement. You just pour based on the quantity you want for the specific color or item or whatever you're going to be using or doing with the pigments. Okay, so let's say you're working with 3 colors, 4 colors. The color you want more of, you just pour more of that. The color you want less of, you pour less resin for that. So that's what I did for here. I just poured the resin based on the quantities I wanted for each of them, just to be sure I was going to get enough of it, and then that's it. So once all the pouring was done into the cups, once I had been able to pour the desired quantity I needed for the project, it was now time to add in the colorants. So here I'm going to be starting off with the white mica powder. So I'm going to start by pouring a decent quantity of white mica powder Into the cup I'm going to be using to mix, or yeah, I'm going to mix the white pigment into. So I use this little spoon to scoop a reasonable or a decent quantity into the resin chemical, and then I just went on to mix it. Once the white was done, the next thing I did was to move on to the other colors. So I did the white, I did both shades of blue, and then once that was done, the next thing I did was to add in the silver leaf sheets into the last cup of resin. To avoid using too much time in the tutorial, I did speed up the process of adding in the colorants or the mica powders. So the next thing we're going to move on to is the adding of the leaf sheets. So I chose silver, the silver color for the leaf sheets I wanted to work with. Leaf sheets come in different colors. There are at least 20 different types or different colors of leaf sheets out there that you can use in your project. So based on the kind of effects you're trying to create, or the type of the type of effects you want in your project, you can just select the color of leaf sheets you prefer. So the trick you always have to bear in mind whenever you are working with leaf sheets is to make sure you work with a mixing stick or spatula that has been dipped into the resin, not into water, into resin. It has to be wet, but you have to use the resin. So once you are able to give it a little dip in the resin and scrape off the excess quantity, it's now going to easily adhere to the leaf sheets, or the leaf sheets are actually, yes, going to be easily adhered to the mixing stick or spatula. That way you can just move it into the cup and mix. But if you do not do it this way and you choose to use your own hands to pick it up from the leaf sheets, what happens is that it's just going to be everywhere. It's very lightweight. You might even end up having it stuck on your hands, and it will only get off if you wipe it off, or if you use you wash it off. Yes. Meaning you are going to end up wasting some of the leaf sheets, which we do not want to be doing here. So I always advise students to just use the same mixing stick to tap on the surface of the leaf sheet and roll. That way you are able to get the quantity in it. So this is how pretty the leaf sheet turns out to be once it's well mixed into the resin. It has a very beautiful effect. So once that's done, we're going to set the mixing sticks aside so that we can proceed and work with the grade cup. So I did say earlier that this is a 4-grade cup, right? It's a 4-grade cup, meaning there are 4 different slots or 4 different categories. No, not categories. Cavities that you can pour your pigments or your colorants into, so that you can just work with all of them at the same time in the project. Okay. So I'm going to start off with a lighter shade of blue. I'm going to pour that into the far end, the far left cavity, or it's far right. Anyway, I'm going to start by pouring that. Next, I'm going to move on to the next color, but before that, I'm going to try and scrape out any excess resin in the cup into the cavity assigned or designated for that color. So I'm going to speed up the video, the rest of the pause, so that we can move right into the tutorial without wasting much time. So here I poured in the white. The next color I poured in was the royal blue color into its designated cavity. And then yes, I did scrape out all the excess into the cavity as well. And lastly, I poured in the silver flakes or the silver leaf sheets into the last cavity. So the mixture is already looking very pretty. This is what we are going to be working with. What we're going to do is to just move straight into the tutorial or into the pouring. So you can see how pretty the mixture looks already. Next, we're going to set that aside and then prep the mold itself. So this mold here is a cloud-shaped trinket. It's a storage mold. Storage mold meaning you can actually use it to store some items. I wouldn't advise you use it to store food items though, but you can use it to store jewelry, keys, whatever. Okay, so any little item, you can even use it as a soap dish. So you just use it to store something in your home. So what we're going to do is we're going to move directly into the pouring. So you realize that it has this pointed edge where you're going to end up pouring all the chemical or all the liquid from. And that's exactly what I did. So I really loved how it started to turn out while it was being poured into the mold. One way or the other is going to look a little marble. Yeah, it's going to have a marble effect. It's going to blend out together beautifully into a single unit, and that's very, very beautiful. So once the pouring was done, I realized the quantity of resin or the quantity we mixed into the resin wasn't enough for the entire thing. I gave it a gentle pat down on the side so that any air bubbles or any bubbles would just rise to the top so that we don't have dents in the project. So I went back to pour in the clear resin into each of the cups, and from there I added in the mica powders respectively before going back to pour them into the grid cup again to just top up with the projects we did. So once the individual pigments or colorants were added into the cups, all I had to do was just to stir them beautifully into it, and that's it. So one thing you need to realize about working with mica powder on your project is that if you do work with a particular quantity and it's not enough, and you're going back to mix another batch of the color again, most of the time you're not going to get the shade exactly how you got it the first time because you can't be too sure of the quantity of colorant, the ratio of the quantity of colorant you worked with in the first pour. So it's normal to have it either having a lighter shade or a darker shade. Don't push yourself too much if you're not getting exactly what you got the first time. It's very normal to not get it exactly the same way. So once the resin was poured into the mold, all that was left was to just give it a tap down, and then we can just leave it to sit till it cures. So yeah, there were still some few leftover pigments in the cups. So all I did was to just pour them onto the surface, trying to imitate the coil effects we were doing while pouring the resin into the mold. You realize we poured them in a circular motion. So that's what I did for the individual colorants or individual pours of resin that was still left in the cups. So I poured each and every single one of them in a circular motion so that I will just imitate the initial pour. So once that was all done and out of the way, I just used the mixing stick to just give it some kind of effect so that it blends well with the initial one, so that it doesn't just stand out on its own, which is not actually going to be a problem. It all depends on how you want your project to look like in the end. Okay, so personally I just didn't want it to look odd or something like that, so I just used the stick to just blend it out in the bottom so that it's going to look as pretty as it can be. So that's what I was doing here in the video. Don't get too confused. I ended up using the circular motion again so that it will just stay the way it's supposed to be. And that's it. All we are left to do is to just tap down on the sides so that if there are any bubbles in the bottom, they will just rise to the top. That way the project will not cure with holes in the sides. So once that was out of the way, I left for this to sit for a full 24 hours to cure completely. And after that, this is how it looks in the end. Okay. I really, really do love how this turned out. It was so pretty. It was more than what I was actually expecting. Okay. So this is it on the other side while still being in the mold, and this is it on the behind. I really want you to understand how easy it is to be a resin artist, and that all that you need to know how to do is to really, really, really know how to mix the resin very well. Any other thing depends on the mold you are working with or the type of effect you are trying to create. Okay. At this point, I was so happy. I couldn't wait to liberate it from the mold. I was so impatient. You should also bear in mind that demolding pieces like this, storage pieces like this, is very, very stressful, or you need a lot of strength to do it. Okay. If you are not patient, you might even rip the mold you are working with. So be very patient whenever you are ripping, or not ripping, whenever you are demolding the piece. So yes, once I did free it from the mold, I just put the mold back in place and set it aside. So this is what we made. This is how lovely it's looking. It's perfect. Okay. It's exactly or even more than what I actually wanted it to even look like. I love how marbled it looks. Okay. It looks like it was obtained from some kind of stone or rock. So I'm using this for storing. I'll be using it to store some candy, but I didn't have it at the time. So I just had these necklace beads, and I was like, let me just use that to demonstrate. So you can use it to store jewelry like I did, or yeah, like I'm still doing here. So you can use it to store your earrings, your bracelets, whatever you do have in your home that is really sitting in the right place for you. You can just use it to store them. You can also use it as a soap dish. That's also very well. It's also normal. There are some people who make resin soap dishes with soap dish molds. So what you're going to realize is that you only need to work with a mold. Okay. Once you're good with your mixing of your resin, you are good with the design, then you just work with different types of molds to create different types of projects. So this is it on the side. You clearly see how mixed or how blended the colors are. um it's very lovely. It's very, very lovely. I was so proud of myself at this point. I really hope you're able to create this piece as well in the comfort of your homes. Yeah, so this is how the whole thing turned out. I also made these keys from leftover resin from the same project. I mean these keychains. Yes, I made these keychains from leftover resin from the same project. So yeah, that's it for today's tutorial. Thank you so much for watching today's video to the end. I really do hope you love this tutorial, and I really hope you're able to recreate this as well. Don't forget to like, to comment, and to subscribe. Hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.